Hagrid. It's not really goodbye after all. Good luck, Harry Potter.
Listen, Dumbledore, you can't just leave orphans on doorsteps. People frown upon it. Hello, my name is Michael and welcome to the Nerdscape. Today I am very excited to begin a series on my favorite work of fiction, Harry Potter. In this series, I plan on going chapter by chapter through the Harry Potter books and discussing them, their themes, their connections to the broader Wizarding world, but above all, to re-experience the magic. And I really hope I can help you re-experience also. With all that being said, this is going to be your spoiler warning. I will be talking about all 7 books as they relate to each other, Pottermore, Cursed Child, the Fantastic Beasts movies, and anything and everything in the Potterverse that is relevant to this discussion. In this episode, we will be discussing the Sorcerer's Stone, briefly discussing its publishing history before we delve into chapters 1 and 2. I decided to cover the first 2 chapters, that is to say, The Boy Who Lived and The Vanishing Glass, for this episode due to the fact that there is a lot to delve into, especially because we're including the publishing history as well as both introductory chapters. However, in the future, I'll probably cover 3 to 4 chapters, and we'll probably continue that trend until we get into the Goblet of Fire era of the books, where we can only cover 1 or 2, as the chapters get so very thick. All that being said, I really hope you don't get too bored to this introduction. So, Joanne Kathleen Rowling finished her manuscript for The Philosopher's Stone in 1995 and began trying to publish her work through her representative, Christopher Little. Dozens of publishers originally denied her, citing the length of the book being too long, controversial representation of boarding schools, and religious reasons. Bloomsbury eventually decided to print 500 copies in the UK in June of 1997, putting 200 copies on retail shelves and 300 in libraries. It was almost an immediate success, winning 2 national literary awards in just 6 months of its publication. Within 2 years, over 300,000 copies were printed in the UK. For the Americans, a bidding war began for the rights to publish the work even before the work appeared in the UK markets. In April of 1997, Arthur Levine from the Scholastic Publishing Company won the right to publish the work for $105,000, a record for the time. Scholastic changed the name from its original Philosopher's Stone to Sorcerer's Stone, in fear that an American audience would be put off by the term philosopher. Which, side note, why? I'm going to refer to the book as Sorcerer's Stone because I'm dirty American and philosopher intimidates me personally, but it's kind of rude to just assume that for the entire country. In any case, debuting in the States in October 1998, the book almost immediately won multiple awards again. To date, Sorcerer's Stone has published in over 75 languages, with over 107 million copies of this single book sold worldwide. Now, the very first book in the Harry Potter series opens with the iconic line, Mr. and Mrs. Dursley of number 4 Privet Drive were proud to say that they were perfectly normal, thank you very much. We are introduced to Vernon and Petunia Dursley and their young son, Dudley. Now, we know from book 6 that Dudley is around a year older than Harry, meaning that our little Diddykins is around 2 years old in this chapter. Maybe he's in his terrible 2 stage and it just took him 16 years to grow out of it? Well, in any case, the Dursleys are described as being terribly normal. They live in the county of Surrey in southern England. In doing some research, it is an upper-class county with a sizable population, but is by no means the richest nor the largest. It is straight down the middle in that sense, making it a very good location for our boring Dursleys to live in. Vernon is described as being a very thick man, and by contrast, Petunia a very skinny woman. These contrasts feel very Dr. Seuss to me, and the entire chapter feels that way, with high contrast and simple language. Sorcerer's Stone is not my favorite book due to this writing, but it is interesting to see how the books develop. We go from such lines as Vernon describing people in robes as the get-ups you saw on young people to the shadow of his last laugh still on his face when describing Fred's death. Although the omniscient narrator is present in this chapter, at this point I think that Rowling hadn't quite figured out her voice. Typically we always see the story through a character's eyes, typically Harry, although on occasion we'll see it through Frank Bryce, Snape, or even the Minister for England. But it is in this book especially she uses the narrator at points to speak directly to us, the audience. Prominently, the Quidditch match, we see things from Harry, Ron, and Hermione all during the same scene. So our narrative starts on a dull, gray Tuesday morning when Vernon Dursley is on his way to work. And Mr. Dursley starts having a very bad day, or at least bad in what he considers good and bad. First, on his way out, he notices a cat reading first a map and then a sign, and this makes him angry as he says cats do not read. Of course, we know this cat to be Professor McGonagall. Side note, where did McGonagall get that map from? I mean, she's in a cat form, and she can't use her wand when she's in Animagus form, so, like, where did she stow it? Yeah, it's probably best not to think about it. Well, anyway, we know Professor McGonagall is here waiting for Dumbledore to arrive. And we don't know from whom, where McGonagall found out that this was going to be the final destination for Dumbledore. We know it wasn't Hagrid because she was also surprised by Hagrid arriving later. But we can assume that McGonagall just is always very aware of Dumbledore's movements, even when he wants them to be. McGonagall later chastises the greater wizarding world for over-celebrating the downfall of Voldemort, yet she's out here in cat form reading a map. Stay classy, McGonagall. Now, to be fair, throughout this chapter, through the eyes of Vernon, we do see a lot of magic on display that pique the ears of muggles. People wearing robes, openly talking about Voldemort and the Potters, using outposts in a muggle setting, even shooting stars for fireworks. We know from a discussion in Order of the Phoenix that at this point, Millicent Bagnold is the current Minister for Magic. She was the minister throughout the First Wizarding War against Voldemort and the subsequent rebuilding after his fall. While she is famous for her quote following Voldemort's downfall of, "I believe in our inalienable right of partying," it is also very interesting that Bagnold was also the political leader during the controversial decisions made by the rules of Barty Crouch Sr. and was minister up through 1990, making her term as minister probably the most important, even more so than Fudge and Scrimgeour. I'd be very interesting to see how she reacted to Barty Crouch Jr. sending Sirius Black off to Azkaban without a trial, and his decision to use unforgivable curses against the Death Eaters. But that aside, due to all of these blatant violations of international statute of secrecy, and even more so because of the mention of the Potters that Vernon overhears, he returns home to Petunia where he attempts to broach the topic of her sister. Petunia is a very interesting character to me, because later we know that she doesn't just hate her sister, she is very simply jealous of her. We'll talk about this at length much later, but I find out when Petunia acknowledges the wizarding world, which is surprisingly scarce when compared to Vernon, it to be very eye-opening moments. So, with Vernon's final thought before he falls asleep, that he couldn't see how any of this could affect him or Petunia, and how he simply didn't understand how they could become mixed up in such things. And, by the way, he was extremely wrong on both points. We pan outside where we are introduced to our favorite master chess player and headmaster, Albus Dumbledore. There's a lot to be said about Dumbledore that we'll cover later on, but for our purposes here, his general description from his boots to his watch, to his beard, is all very whimsical, and really it is the first sight of a warm character in this series. He is the first wizard we grow any sort of connection to, and his general air of well-being, as well as other characters in this chapter hyping him up, make us feel safe with him, a feeling that is carried pretty much all the way until Book 7. I think it's a testament to Rowling that she was able to make us, the audience, and the in-universe characters feel so safe with the characters so quickly. Dumbledore uses the Deluminator, and I know it's called the Put-Outer all the way until Book 7, but I'm not going to call it that. Cut me some slack, Jesus. To extinguish the ambient light in the area and setting the atmosphere. He is here to deliver Harry to his closest living relatives. After greeting Professor McGonagall, we begin to get into the overarching plot of the book and the series as a whole. That there was a powerful dark wizard that for the last several years had terrorized the wizarding community. In the night previous, the Dark Lord had showed up and attempted to kill Harry after he had killed his parents. On the attempt, however, for reasons unknown to the general population, Voldemort's power broke. We know that at this point, Dumbledore did not know about the existence of the Horcruxes, as he begins that research after the events of the second book. Therefore, we can infer that Dumbledore is going off the principle of no body, no death when he assumes Voldemort will return. This being the reason that he chooses to invoke the ancient magic of leaving Harry with his blood relatives to specifically protect Harry against Voldemort, as well as his followers. However, we know that Dumbledore and the Ministry can generally protect people from the Death Eaters if they need to, so I feel that this protection, despite what Dumbledore says, is to protect Harry from old Tom Riddle. Also, it is a good point that Dumbledore makes that Harry growing up famous would have ruined his sense of normality, and it could have gone to his head. However, knowing Dumbledore's pragmatic worldview, I think that this is more to do with the fact that he didn't want Harry having a large ego that would dampen his ability to be the chosen one and act on the prophecy. After an offer of lemon drops, Hagrid arrives. Before this, McGonagall had mentioned that Hagrid, he means well, certainly, but questions on the overall responsibility of the character. This sets up Hagrid for all 7 books, where between Norbert, Aragog, the Scroots, and Grop, we see this character trait on display over and over again. Hagrid does, however, manage to retrieve Harry from the broken house in Godric's Hollow. We can use context clues where we can point out that Godric's Hollow was in the southwestern part of England, in the western country, meaning it should have taken Hagrid only a couple of hours to bring Harry to Surrey. So what took him so long? Well, we can assume he traveled from Hogwarts to western England to Surrey, so that's probably, I don't know, maybe an 8-hour trip. So that probably is it. However, I don't understand why Dumbledore simply didn't apparate to pick up Harry and then bring him to Privet Drive. It is simply much quicker. However, this is the first time we hear Sirius's name. The motorbike belonged to him, of course, which we also see a motorbike schematic in Sirius's bedroom in Book 7, so that comes full circle. We know that Sirius had asked Hagrid to allow him, Sirius, to take Harry, but Hagrid refused on account of Dumbledore's orders. Now, I wonder if Sirius still would have confronted Peter Pettigrew if Sirius had been responsible for Harry at this point. And yes, I know Sirius's irresponsibility when it comes to Harry was the major plot point of Book 5, but this was before his time in Azkaban, and I wonder if that change would have resulted in a different outcome, at least specifically for Sirius. Side note, speaking of magical transportation, Dumbledore mentions that he must have passed a dozen feasts on his way there, but there's a slight problem with that. And the fact that he was, apparating, and when you apparate, you don't pass anything, you kind of just appear in your location. So does that mean that Dumbledore was just party hopping? I mean, probably, it's in his character. But also, Dumbledore, you have like 1,000 other things that you need to be doing right now. And also, this is November 1st. There's a school term going on right now. What are both you and McGonagall doing here in the middle of a Muggle world delivering Harry? I mean, I get it. It's Harry. He's important. But responsibility. Delegate. Delegate, Dumbledore. It's very important. I don't think you really ever learned that. But that's beside the point. So, with Hagrid's arrival, they leave the young boy on the doorstep with a letter to the Dursleys, explaining the situation. We don't know the letter word for word, but we know Dumbledore explained to Petunia that Lily and James were dead, leaving their son an orphan and imploring that Petunia at the very least protects her sister's legacy, and with the hopes that she would care for Harry as a son. And with that, Dumbledore returns the lights to their places, Hagrid speeds off in the motorbike, and McGonagall scurries off as a cat. With a final wish of good luck to Harry, Dumbledore disapparates, leaving Harry on the doorstep, not knowing that his next 10 years would be miserable, not knowing that he was famous, not knowing that throughout the country the wizards and witches were all toasting to Harry Potter, the boy who lived. And thus we end the chapter and enter into a time skip of 10 years. Rowling uses photographs in the house to detail the passage of time, and also uses them to show the mistreatment of Harry from the beginning by showing that there were no pictures of him. This is a subtle good use of writing to prepare the reader for what was about to come. On the side, if you ever want to feel sad about something, just imagine 6-year-old Harry, who hasn't learned to deal with his abuse yet, being sad because he doesn't understand why he didn't get a Christmas present that year. But We'll cross that bridge later. Thus, Harry wakes up on Dudley's birthday in his famous cupboard next to some spiders. Here we get our description of Harry. I think it is often lost on the audience about how small Harry is. He's skinny, probably due to the fact that he's only fed the bare minimum, and is also short compared to most other boys his age. His messy hair is iconic of the Potters, of course. In fact, if you're ever curious where the money that Harry inherited come from, this is because his paternal grandfather actually developed a line of hair care products that did very well enough to make the Potters wealthy. His green eyes obviously being his mother's gift to him. I think it's interesting for Petunia, who had to look at her dead sister's eyes every time she looked at Harry. It's just another tragedy of the Potter's death. And finally, Harry has the lightning scar, the remnants of his encounter with Voldemort. Although he initially is told that he got this in a car crash, the car crash that, according to the Dursleys, killed his parents. So Harry is awakened from a dream where he is remembering subconsciously his delivery on the motorbike. He is awakened by Petunia so he can make breakfast for Dudley's birthday. Now, Dudley is the worst human being at pretty much any given moment in Harry's time in the Muggle world. He's a very large boy, although to be fair, not as comically large as he would become a prisoner of Azkaban. He bullies Harry relentlessly, and above all, he manipulates his parents, who are bad enough on their own, into giving him whatever he wants, and by default giving Harry the scraps of whatever he didn't want. Now, I don't know about you, but I personally remember the best gifts that I got on occasions like Christmas or birthdays were from the local fire department, like socks and such. So the idea of Dudley complaining because he only got 36 presents instead of 39 is simply infuriating. Now, granted, we're supposed to be infuriated by Dudley, so the writing does accomplish its purpose. So, you go, JK. Thanks for that. Now, at this point, we learn that for his birthday, Dudley is being taken to the zoo with his bestie, Pierce Polkins, while Harry was planning to stay with the cat lady of a neighbor, Mrs. Figg. Mrs. Figg is obviously a squib and Dumbledore's employed to keep an eye on Harry, although at this point Harry obviously doesn't know that. In this chapter, however, Miss Figg has broken her leg by tripping over a cat. Due to this, Harry has no babysitter to watch him while the Dursleys go to the zoo. After Dudley's wailing and Vernon's threats, which, by the way, at one point they suggest to leave Harry in a car during late spring, early summer for probably hours without help. Like, Jesus, guys, if you just want to kill the kid, just do it and hide the body. Don't torture him. But anyway, Harry is permitted to go to the zoo. On the way, Vernon nearly kills them all when he berates Harry when Harry brings up the fact that he had the dream, although he doesn't know about it, about the motorbike. I know this chapter just feels like a slug punch to the stomach, but it is needed to emphasize how bad Harry has it so we can feel relieved when he is inducted into the wizarding world. So they arrive at the zoo, and much to his surprise, Harry is having a good day. He gets a free ice cream pop and sundae without much argument, and he's a 10-year-old. He is genuinely enjoying the animals. That is, as you know in the story, they get into the reptile house. By this point, Dudley and Pierce have gotten mostly bored by the animals, and even the giant boa constrictor wasn't keeping their attention because he was asleep. Harry, however, pays very close attention to the snake, and it is here that we get our first sight into Parseltongue. We know that Harry got this ability due to the piece of Voldemort's soul attached to his own. Harry, of course, doesn't know any of this, but the conversation with the snake is simple enough. We just see Harry's sympathy for the snake being raised in captivity, and the general lack of excitement in his life. At this point, Pierce and Dudley see what is going on and push Harry to the ground to get a better look at the snake, pushing up against the glass cage. Due to Harry being angry, he inadvertently disappears the glass, and the other two boys fall into the tank, and the snake slithers away. After numerous apologies by the zoo manager, the Dursleys' party returns home. Unfortunately, Pierce speaks up and says Harry was talking to the snake. Once Pierce is out of sight, Harry is banished to his cupboard again. Throughout the chapter, we're told that many strange things happen to Harry. His hair regrowing, to the clothes he didn't want shrinking, to accidentally apparating, although he doesn't know what that means, to the top of the schoolhouse roof. The snake incident being only the recent in those cases. This chapter ends with Harry wishing that some distant relation would come to save him from the last 10 miserable years with the Dursleys, that somebody, anybody, would be his friend. He didn't even have friends at school due to the fact that Dudley and his gang of bullies would turn their attention to anybody who dared talk to Harry, and nobody messed with Dudley's gang. Man, this chapter was a freaking punch to the face, but like I said, we needed this chapter to appreciate our entrance into the wizarding world more, and to establish Harry's character as well as all the weird things that happen to him when the reveal takes place. People often complain that Harry has a very basic and bland personality, suffering from quote-unquote main character syndrome. But I think if we go back to the introductory chapter, we can really begin to analyze and discuss why he acts the way that he does. For example, why does he typically skip meals when he's stressed? Well, it's because he was often given less food when he was in trouble when he was a child. Why does he value his friends so highly? No, it's not because he's the protagonist and that's what protagonists do. It's because he never had anybody who cared for him and vice versa, and understands what it would be like without them. These are all very important character details that I will continue to point out throughout the series. And with that, we end our introduction into this world. Next time, I plan on covering the Letters from No One, the Keeper of Keys, and Diagon Alley, where we will truly get the most detail of the world that we will be entering. I really hope you enjoyed this analysis of the first chapters in Harry Potter and our entrance into my favorite world of fiction. I truly do love this series, and I hope I can capture just a micro amount of the amazing world that we all love. Thanks for watching. If you're interested in other series, I have some discussions on A Song of Ice and Fire, the books the show the Game of Thrones series is based on, and I plan on doing some other episodes on the worlds of other works of fiction such as Percy Jackson and The Hunger Games. Please like and subscribe and comment to help out the algorithm, and I'll see you next time on the Nerdscape.